It's 1984, and Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, is seeking to leave a mark on the amusement world with the announcement of their latest attraction, Avalanche Run.
Disneyland doesn't have anything like it. They don't even have one at Disney World. It's called Avalanche Run. And it's new this summer only at Cedar Point. Avalanche Run. It's an Olympic bobsled on wheels. Ride it this summer at Cedar Point, the amazement park.
Opening a year later for their 1985 season, this Intamin design bobsled coaster shuttled guests through 2 helixes and overbanked turns over its 1,932-foot course. At a height of 63 feet and top speed of 40 miles per hour, the ride had only the bragging rights of being the only one of its kind in the Midwest. It was a lukewarm investment for a park soon to be known for making extreme, groundbreaking ones. But could this ride have instead served as a foundation for a larger, long-term plan for an area of the park reimagined numerous times? Previously home to the Cyclone, Jumbo Jet, and Wildcat coasters, the northern beach side of Cedar Point had been the busiest section of the park for many a year, and that would continue into its future in colorful and mysterious ways. Richard Kinzel was the chief decision-maker at Cedar Fair throughout its golden period. When in 1990, he announced that the park was to spend a further $4 million on improvements to Avalanche Run, some turned their heads in confusion. This was more than the park had spent to install the ride initially at $3.8 million, and what sort of upgrades could truly improve an attraction only 5 years into its life. The outlay was to be a Space Mountain-inspired knockoff based on a trip to space rerouted through Alaska via an intergalactic tour operator that made no secret of its cargo service being a chief contributor to its questionable success. Avalanche Run was to be entirely enclosed in a hastily designed shed of a building. The overall decor matched this no-frills aesthetic with occasional functioning animatronics and a themed queue line that resembled the interior of an Atari game cartridge. Despite being a 90s edition, Disaster Transport looked and felt more inspired from the 80s than the decade of which it was introduced. A sensible reasoning behind the enclosure was the aggressive natural conditions to be found with Avalanche Run's location, with sand and wind assaulting the structure from Lake Erie in both hot and frigid seasonal conditions. But given the location's history of frequent ride movement over the years, a relocation of Avalanche Run could not be ruled out as cheaper at that time. Could the ambitious decision to enclose the ride also be a cover-up for a secondary purpose? There is also a curiosity about the unusual naming of the ride, Disaster Transport being a variation on the faux company at the base of the ride experience, Dispatchmaster Transport, the acronym of which would be dangerous in current times, but leaving open the suggestion that the project's creators were ahead of their time in exploring not only the galaxy, but also the mind. The most curious of design elements was the gigantic 12E painted on the summit of the lift hill portion of the ride. The mysterious purpose of this coating had been rumored to be a homage to the ride's creator, Eric, an employee of iTech, a company still in existence with lucrative partnerships, including most notably NASA. Were we really to believe that such an ambiguous honor would be bestowed upon an otherwise innocuous ride permanently? Or was it an indication of a purpose more sinister? Who was Eric, and why were his creations so important to deserve such a tribute? Another more believable explanation behind the 12E is that it is a coded representation of Lake Erie, with 12 being the letter L, 12th in the alphabet, and E for Erie.
The park was just coming out of its most successful season, arguably, after the introduction of Magnum XL 200, so the need for a new radical attraction was not exactly necessary, but any questioning was quickly shot down.
The ride's early years as Disaster Transport was slightly before the annual haunt events that would become regular to Cedar Point. Always searching for alternative revenue streams, Cedar Fair constructed Disaster Transport possibly with a dual purpose in mind, one for the public and another for a covert venue for the ceremonies of a secret organization.
The park had found itself attached to a stealth organization with a thirst for entertainment and power beyond any normal person's understanding. They could not have had any last-minute misgivings. The project had to go ahead. They wanted their place and the park had signed over its allegiance in blood. Most of the expense behind Disaster Transport went towards concealing its true purpose behind costume shop theming. No one with the understanding of these things would believe the park would have spent such a large amount of money on all those depressing and quickly decaying figures. The public had no idea of the truth behind those rather simple steel wells.
Inside the loading station, the number 7 was prominently located on the dispatch bay's control console. Was this a reference to the holy number 7, or some other reference possibly like the 7 deadly sins, some of which may have been committed after hours within the structure's walls?
Made sure that they had ironclad non-disclosure agreements in place, and anyone that found themselves in the restricted area by accident were quickly dealt with.
Later, the enclosed spaces inside Disaster Transport were used for haunt attractions in the early years of Halloweekends. While the ride rattled above guests, we were invited to explore Cedar Point Cemetery, and later Pharaoh's Secret, and even later Happy Jack's Toy Factory. None of which hinted at the truth behind the building's true purpose. While the seemingly overpriced original Q-line theming iTech produced deteriorated beyond repair in a short time, some of the rooms housing it were closed off completely later in its life. The attraction evolved into a musty, malfunctioning failure of an attempt to match the popularity of Space Mountain. All the expense to revamp Avalanche was in vain early on, other than perhaps a secret deeper within, hidden from common view, and only briefly available to view during a ride itself. When Matt Ouimet succeeded Kinzel as head of Cedar Fair in early 2012, one of his first moves was to announce the end of Disaster Transport, the ride oddly closing mid-season and swiftly demolished. This would turn out to be needed for the park's next major coaster addition, Gatekeeper, a Bolliger and Mabillard wing coaster. 12E oddly hung in the skyline alone, lingering above the park, as a final reminder of the presence of the bunker of a building that housed the park's largest secret. Eventually, it and the surrounding buildings and attractions took their place in Cedar Point Museum, only recently Wicked Twister being added to the list of victims of this area. The park, meanwhile, still has yet to replace the indoor experience Disaster Transport once offered. Having gone through a turbulent 27 years of life, Disaster Transport had shuttled riders through a perplexing experience that was enjoyed by many, mostly for the air conditioning found inside. But the real story behind Cedar Point's most mysterious attraction may never be revealed. Thank you for watching. Always enjoy.